Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
And last but not least, we have Nubia Peña from the Utah Coalition talking about creating change beyond the classroom.
All right, well, thank you so very much again for the opportunity to join you on this stage. Many of us may be familiar with the developing conversation across our nation as it relates to oppressive and discriminatory dress code policies in our schools. There has been coverage from local and national news outlets that have brought attention to the various accounts of youth impacted by these guidelines. Activists who have spoken out against these codes argue that they are almost exclusively targeting women in language and practice, which may be a possible violation of their Title IX rights. Now, I recognize that I just said the words policy and Title IX, and some of you may feel inclined to tune me out because you think it has nothing to do with prevention efforts, but I ask that as I unpack the next few slides, you consider policy reform in Title IX as part of the larger equation geared towards increasing protective factors while reducing the risk factors of perpetration and victimization for our vulnerable youth. Now, I'll come back to this in just a moment, but to ease us into the conversation, let me start off on some familiar ground, which is addressing rape culture. Now, take a look at this picture. Many of us in this movement know this image well. This is the so-called spectrum, which is dictating society's standards of appropriate hemlines and classifies the levels between prude and whore with everything in between. Now, within our work, we know and understand how violent and oppressive this is, how it perpetuates and promotes a rape culture, how it blames the victims and justifies violence. But this standard continues to be adopted as the norm through the justified use of restrictive and gender-specific dress codes. In all levels of K-12 and institutions of higher education, youth are being punished, shamed, unjustly disciplined, labeled, denied valuable in-class instruction time, and suspended because of these guidelines. These practices disproportionately impact young women, uniquely affecting young women and girls of color, LGBTQ youth, and gender non-conforming students. Now, I selected a few stories that depict the problem with messaging that is rampant across the U.S. schools. Here we have a 7th grader who was told to cover up because her dress was inappropriate since her bare arms were sexual objects and could not be shown. A 17-year-old was stripped of her National Honor Society title within the same hour that she won the title because she gave her speech in a dress with spaghetti straps. A young woman whose dress followed all of the dress code guidelines was kicked out of her prom by a chaperone that said a group of fathers who were assisting at the dance had been inappropriately staring at her. A student wore a shirt with the words, "Nobody knows I'm a lesbian." The school described her shirt as offensive and distracting and told her to change it. I'm so glad this happened last year, and I'm just grateful that you are saying, that you're all voicing your anger and your frustration at this. But when she refused to take the shirt off, she was suspended. Now, this is particularly significant because of findings in the newly released CDC report that show LGBTQ students, especially gender non-conforming girls, are more likely to experience harsh disciplinary treatment than their straight counterparts. As these policies relate to race, our young women of color, especially our young black girls, are disproportionately disciplined than their white peers for nonviolent behavior, including dress code violations that send a clear message to conform and that natural is in fact not beautiful. A 12-year-old girl was threatened with expulsion unless she got her puffy hair under control. A 7-year-old was sent home in tears when the school's administration claimed that her dreads were not presentable enough, that they were faddish, out of dress code, and that her hair might be a distraction from the atmosphere that they were trying to achieve. There are several more examples, and I wish I could stay here all day and just share with you what is really happening across U.S. schools, but just raise your hand if any of those accounts made you uncomfortable. Look around, every single one of you. Now, how many of you were angry when you heard that? Every single one of you, thank you. Now, I want you to consider what you would do as a parent if this was your child. That's right, get mad. I'm trying to create anarchy, y'all. I'm trying to create some mass movement on these policies, right? Okay, well, now what I want you to consider is what you could do as prevention educators. for all children, not just your own, but for the children whose parents don't know their rights, don't know what they could do in schools to change these policies and create safer institutions, right? Feel free to say, oh, thank you, there we go. There we go. All right, but do you see the intersections of what we teach in our classes as rape prevention educators and how it conflicts with the targeted message that is normalized in schools about women and sexuality, violence and accountability? So coming back to this question of why should rape prevention educators engage in policy reform, well, it's because it's part of the equation. It's part of the formula. It's a necessary piece in our fight to eliminate sexual violence. Our initiatives must be top-down, bottom-up, and inclusive so that when we spend countless hours in those classrooms with youth, hoping that our lessons are absorbed, that they are not confronted with conflicting messages by one of the most critical institutions of their developmental years in their schools. By incorporating policy reform and Title IX as tools that we strategically utilize, we are able to take our initiatives to the outer layers of the socio-ecological model, where we can inspire prevention of gender violence by creating shifts in institutional practices that address pervasive sexism, racism, and discrimination. So Title IX is not just for college campuses and sports. And we as prevention educators have to dive in and dig in deep to see how these tools can help us create safer schools for all students, to protect their right to education, and fight against school push-out, hostile environments, and discriminatory practices. So I recognize that many of you are already doing this work, but for those who are hesitant and considering if this in fact fits under the purview of prevention, this is our call to action. Here is where we get to create change beyond the classrooms and help shift those practices that oppress and silence through justified means, policies that normalize the mass policing of our bodies, that excuse just objectification and violence wrought against them, and limit the full potential of our authentic selves. We can help create equitable environments that intentionally and unapologetically address systemic and institutional racism, sexism, and intersectional injustice, while simultaneously creating the policies and practices for our girls and young women of color, trans and cis, to thrive alongside others. Now, during our roundtable, I welcome in the room those with experience in policy reform to help guide the dialogue about how we begin to do this work within our respective organizations. And what you can expect from me is a brief overview of know your rights that can easily be incorporated in your presentations, as well as examples of what we have recently created in our community to equip parents and youth to demand their rights be upheld in institutions of education. We will also discuss tools that currently exist that can support us stepping into this role of policy advocates. And then finally, we will consider a unified campaign against these practices by creating alliances with non-traditional partners. Now, in closing, I ask that you view the opportunity of creating change beyond the classrooms through policy reform as a promotion. There's no money attached, but it's a promotion in the RPE movement, right? We as educators have been diligent and responsible and successful with working at the first tier by influencing individual minds and hearts. But now we are being trusted with the opportunity to create mass impact and reframe the way institutions support standards that embody safety, inclusion, injustice, and fairness, and the right to exist free of violence for all. We get to be a part of an ongoing historical movement to end sexual violence, and I look forward to being promoted with you and working alongside each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CALCASA.org.